Yeah, it was an interesting experience as to why I wrote this book. It was one of those moments when I felt like I had to write it, like I couldn't do anything but write it, which is an artist and as a Christian is something that I figured, well, okay, I better pay attention to that. Sealed is a story of family. It's a story of faith. It's a story of struggle. It talks about how my upbringing in a pretty conservative, almost kind of quasi-fundamentalist Mormon family had both gifts and pain that were a part of my growing up, and how God came and found me in the midst of sorrow and depression, and set me on a whole new path that I never could have anticipated. And what I found in writing Sealed was that it was really a gift to be able to go back through my entire life and to reconcile different parts of my experience that had been difficult to reconcile before. My Mormon self, my Mormon upbringing, my family, my Christian self, and my call into ministry. But then also to make sense and to make peace with my immediate family, my extended family, and this is pretty Mormon of me, but my ancestors as well, to go back and to learn more about them and to think about them and how they are a part of me now. And to be able to bring all those different parts of myself that had felt disparate and disjointed, put them together into one story was quite a gift. What I hope people will take from the book is, most importantly of all, just a sense of the extravagant and amazing and outrageous grace of God. That if there's anything that my story and my experience have shown me, it's that God's grace is real, and that God's grace makes a huge difference in everyday life, and can be transformative in a life. It's a deeply theological book. That's something I couldn't avoid as a person who thinks deeply about theological issues. A lot of times Mormons don't understand Orthodox Christians, and I say Orthodox with a little O. Mormons don't understand Orthodox Christians super well. Orthodox Christians of many different stripes don't understand Mormons very well, and I hope that by sharing my story, people will be able to make connections and gain deeper understanding into a culture or a belief system or belief structure that they don't really understand as well as they might. And that will help them love their neighbors a little bit better. And then I hope that anyone who just enjoys a good story will read it and take value in it. Whether you like spiritual writing or just hopefully a well-told memoir, my hope is that there's something in there for all those readers.
People have compared your husband to Leonardo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Arts on the Fond. We are happy to present tonight Katie's first book, published by Thornbush Press. And I'm going to start out by welcoming Sarah Hinlicky Wilson, who's the publisher. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Sarah is associate pastor at Tokyo Lutheran Church in Japan, where she lives with her husband and son. So she's coming to us in the morning as we're heading into our evening here in Minnesota. Sarah is the co-host of the podcast Queen of the Sciences, Conversations Between a Theologian and Her Dad, with Paul R. Hinlicky, her father. And she's published over 200 articles on theological and spiritual topics, a number of books, both popular and scholarly. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and Katie now to take you through the journey of her book. And so welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mira. And here's Katie. All right, well, I'm going to introduce you to Katie, all of you out there watching or listening, and then we'll talk a bit about how this book came to Thornbush Press. Yeah. So this lovely Katie Langston grew up Mormon in Cache Valley, Utah, but she is now the director of digital strategy for Luther Seminary's innovation team, where she oversees digital projects aimed at cultivating vibrant Christian spirituality in a postmodern, post-Christian context. Katie is also married to Lanny, and they have 2 human children and 1 dog child, Buffy, who is, of course, named after the vampire slayer. That's probably the most important thing that you need to know about her.
It's true.
That's true. And Sealed is her first book, published by Thornbush Press. So let me just give all of you a little background here. I started Thornbush Press last year as a plant an apple tree, despite the fact that the world is ending tomorrow, kind of move in response to the pandemic, and but also in some frustration, shall we say, at traditional publishing. That's a polemic for another time. But anyway, Katie and I have known each other for a number of years. I was first introduced to her by our mutual friend, Catherine Schifferdecker, who figures prominently in Sealed, because at the time I was editor of a journal called Lutheran Forum, and I was looking for stories of Lutherans in 2017, this big anniversary year, about what the Christian faith and its Lutheran expression meant to them. And so Catherine said, oh, you have to get Katie's story. And it was so good. I featured it prominently. It was the first of the many little profiles in that issue. And from there, we became friends. And then somewhere along the line, I mentioned to Katie that I was writing a memoir. And then she said, oh, I'm writing a memoir too. And I just, it took me a while for the penny to drop. But then I have this very vivid memory of us sitting together at a WNBA game, and we started talking more seriously about our respective memoirs. And Katie was saying questions about structure. So I told her some of the resources I used. And from then we started talking about it more. And I, being not of a Mormon background, became avidly, perhaps luridly curious into the backstory. And so she was so kind as to entrust me with a draft of her book. And I just thought it was phenomenal. And it was so good that I said, you need to go to one of the top publishers of these kind of Christian books. And Katie was like, well, aren't you starting a publishing house? Are you sure you don't want to publish my book? And I was like, your book is too good for my brand new press. You need to go higher. But, again, due to the aforementioned issues with traditional publishing, but also the fact that it's very difficult to retain full creative control. And Katie's book has a lot of very intimate details, perhaps shocking or uncomfortable for people who want a very tidy sort of conversion story, and no awkwardnesses or difficulties along the way. And so ultimately, I believe so strongly in Katie's book. I said, well, if you are willing to go with a newbie like me, then I would be thrilled for you to be my second author. We're not counting Martin Luther as that because he's dead. So Katie is the second living author to be published with Thornbush Press. So anyway, her story, again, we'll get into it in more details. It starts with her Mormon background, but it proves to be just a tremendous witness, but also explanation of what it is that Christians believe and why we believe it, but delivered in this format of a very personal narrative. So often people find theology or doctrine kind of off-putting or distant. But I think, Katie, the reason why your book is so amazing is because it gives life to all of these things and makes the Trinity so awesome and grace so personal and all these kind of great things. So I am tremendously proud to be the publisher of your book.
Oh,
but I'm only at the far end of this story. Tell us where it started. Why did you write this book? Why did you decide to share the stuff that you share?
Yeah, I started writing this book about 10 years ago. I wrote the first third of it when I was in the middle of one of the several existential crises that I talk about in the book or that I recount in the story. And I got about a third of the way through, kind of up through my childhood, and then I realized I had no idea where the story was going because I kind of had the intuition to understand that I hadn't lived it yet. that I had to sort of live into that. So I put the manuscript away. I put it to the side, but I kept it. And I kind of always knew, I was like, at some point, I think I'm going to come back to this. And so it was a couple of years, maybe a year or two after I'd been baptized and had been Lutheran and the Christian, Lutheran tradition, and I had was on my way to becoming a Lutheran pastor, and it came back. It came back with a fury. It actually came back. I don't know. I think I saw her, Lois Malcolm. I don't know if you're still there, but in one of I was taking a Christology course with Lois Malcolm at Luther Seminary. It was independent study with another good friend of mine, Bethany, and I started writing this paper, and it was like I was starting it was almost like I was writing a memoir as I was writing this paper, as I was trying to piece together disparate parts of my own history and theology and all that stuff. And so after that class, I said, holy smokes, there's something in here. There's a story in here that wants to be birthed. So that's when I started writing it in earnest. And around that time, you and I talked about narrative structures and all kinds of stuff. So that's, but it just really felt like it was a story that needed to be told.
It's so interesting that you started it so long ago, but had the right instinct that actually that particular story was not over it. Obviously, your whole story is not over yet by a long shot, but where it ends, this book ends, is such a satisfying conclusion, and also gives you the sense of the story isn't over, but it's going to be launching now into something new. So that's fantastic.
Thanks.
All right. Well, why don't we do our first book drawing, and for some lucky winner out there.
Yes. So what I have done is everyone who RSVP'd, I promised this, that anyone who RSVP'd for either interested or coming, I put you all on a list, and then I put you into this handy dandy little spinny wheel thing. So we're going to spin the wheel. We're going to do this, a few times during the night. So if you don't win this time, stick around. There's more and more and more chances to win. I think we'll do this like 4 or 5 times. So here we go. Here is the first one. And if the winner, if you don't happen to be on the call, which I wouldn't be talking, I'm saying you, but you're not there because by definition, you're not on the call. I'll reach out after the fact. Okay, here we go. And the winner is Randall Davidson. Congratulations. Congratulations. So
that was so exciting.
That was very exciting. So I'll reach out afterward.
Okay, great. And now, Katie, take it away with a first reading. I'm so excited to hear this one. This is one of my favorite scenes in the whole book.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so just a little bit of context before I read the scene. This takes place when I'm about 11 years old, so it's toward the beginning of the book. And what happened in the scene right before was that I was in church and was listening to a Sunday school lesson in which they said that any person who takes the sacrament or communion unworthily eats and drinks damnation to their soul. And so I, as a relatively anxious child, took that to heart, and shenanigans ensued. And here is one. Sacrament meeting came later that afternoon, and while the priests blessed the bread, I dissected my week. I'd been far from perfect, but fortunately, I'd confessed my sins to Mom that morning. I wondered if I might have done something in the interim that I'd forgotten, but reasoned that because I was at church, it would be unlikely. Satisfied, I offered a quick prayer seeking forgiveness and prepared myself to partake. A 12-year-old deacon carried the sacrament from row to row. When he got to our family's pew, he stopped beside me and extended the tray. I reached out to take the morsel in my right hand. From the corner of my eye, I saw the bishop seated behind the pulpit, his eyes closed in prayer. In an instant, An image of him, naked and heaving on top of his wife's body, flashed through my mind. Surprise coursed through me, and my hand flickered back from above the tray. The deacon's blank expression broke with curiosity. I dismissed the thought with a determined blink and extended my hand again, but the image returned, this time more clearly than before. Trembling, I took the tray from the deacon and passed it quickly to Neil, careful not to make eye contact with anyone who might wonder why I had refused. For 3 weeks in a row, I was haunted by the image of my bishop's large, pulsating backside. When I walked to church, I vowed it wouldn't overtake me. I begged Heavenly Father to bless me with clean thoughts, and for the first couple of hours, I was safe. I belted out children's songs, participated in lessons, but the moment we gathered in the chapel and the priest knelt behind the ordinance table to bless the bread and water, all I could see was the bishop's white flesh rolling like a thundercloud across his wife's receptive bosom. The fourth time I refused, my father grabbed my hand before I passed the tray, his grip hard. "What's going on?" he whispered. I shook my head. "I can't talk about it." He looked at me with bewilderment. "You are sorting this out after church with your mother," he said. "We need to know what's happening." I nodded miserably. Although I usually confessed everything to Mom, there was something about this that was so shameful I hadn't dared mention it even to her. The moment we got home, Mom whisked me away to her room and sat me down on the bed. She hovered above me, blue eyes cloudy with concern. "Katie, whatever it is, you can tell me," she said. "I'm here for you." I slumped, head in my hands. "It's bad," I said. "Really, really bad." She held her breath. "It's okay, sweetie. I can take it." I glanced up. Her face had the look of a hospital patient who expected terrible news, but had summoned just enough courage to conceal the full depth of her concern. She half smiled. I cringed. I knew I would have to tell her, if not now, then soon, and the faster I spat it out, the faster this would all be over. Before I could talk myself out of it, I blurted as quickly as I could, "I keep thinking dirty thoughts about the bishop." The confession hung in the air like a withering balloon. She cleared her throat. I'm sorry," she said. "Can you say that again?" I said, "I keep thinking dirty thoughts about the bishop." "That's what I thought you said." There was a long pause. I watched her anxiously through my fingertips. For the briefest moment, I thought she might burst out laughing. A sudden lightness danced in her eyes, but it evaporated in an instant, and I wondered if I had imagined it. When she spoke again, her voice was solemn and careful. "I can imagine that would be very disturbing." I nodded. "But you know, it happens to everyone." My head snapped up. "It does?" "Oh, sure," she said. "I've even had moments when I've been in the temple and started thinking weird things." "You have?" Mom sighed. "Honey, you're growing up. You're going to start thinking about these things from time to time, but when you stopped taking the sacrament, we thought something really serious had happened." My curiosity was piqued. What could be more serious than picturing my priesthood leader naked? "Like what?" I demanded. She opened her mouth to respond, but in a flash of pure grace, closed it again. "You know," she said, "I don't think I need to give you anything more to worry about." She held me close, and I felt safe and warm inside her softness. When the sacrament came the next week, I took it, and the image of my bishop's fat, flowing ass faded to the edges of my consciousness. It did not torment me again.
Unmute. There we go. Okay. I love that so much. I've read these words so many times, but it's the first time I've heard you narrate them. And you talk about how much theater was a part of your early experience, and it shows through. That was just tremendous. One thing I really love about this is that this is still when you are entirely in the Mormon world, but you identify your mother's refusal to give you more things to worry about as a moment of pure grace. And I thought, that was tremendously gracious of you to recognize divine grace at work also in this place that was so complicated and painful for you. So and of course it's very funny, but I love that the punchline is actually the grace, not the bishop's backside.
Yeah.
So, but let's follow up on that, because a big theme of this whole book is religious scrupulosity, which is both a spiritual condition and, as you later found out, was also a mental health reality that you had to cope with. And it was a kind of a perfect storm in some ways. But how was that experience of scrupulosity central to your life and to the shaping of this particular story?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think I would be, I wouldn't have had some of the, let's say, kind of deep spiritual wrestling that I've had if I didn't have, religious scrupulosity. But that was something that struck me from the time I was very, very young, like even as young as 7, 8 years old. It was with me. And to this day, it's with me, right? Like, eventually the scrupulosity is a term for kind of religious OCD. It's got it's a clinical diagnosis. It's not just sort of a vexation of the spirit, but it's a real thing. And so, there are still times that I wrestle with that feeling of being unworthy. Have I done something that would separate me from the love of God? And that was sort of the driving question, I think, of my whole of this whole book is like, can I be separated from God? Can the ceiling be broken? It's one of the questions that really drives the book and has animated me my whole life.
So you just said the word ceiling, which the way you used it just now was SEALING, not CEILING. And we had a question about the title, actually, Sealed, which of course is directly related. So tell us, why is the book called Sealed? You informed me that every Mormon would get this and that the rest of us would need to be educated. So educate us now.
That's right. Mormons in the chat, back me up. You know what sealed means. No, so I mean, sealing is to be sealed for time and all eternity, as Mormons talk about it, is sort of the highest blessing that one can receive in Mormonism, and it comes in the temple. It's called the temple sealing, and it's something that, when you grow up in a family, and a loving family, like, I grew up in a really loving family, it was something that you really wanted. I can imagine there were complexities with people who didn't have loving families, who maybe then the concept of sealing tortured them in a different way. But for me, it was like, oh my God, I'm going to be separated if I'm not worthy, because it was contingent upon worthiness of qualifying for the blessing of the sealing. And so the book, I don't want to give too much away, but the book really wrestles with the contingency aspect of that, and how that was a torment for me, and how it was healed by the grace of Jesus Christ. So you were sealed and healed. Yeah. It's more true if it rhymes. Yeah, okay. It is. I think that's in the Bible somewhere. It is. Yeah. Deuteronomy or something. Yeah. Okay. So, but you tell a lot of stories along this line. Was it hard for you to go back and relive in this very detailed way, and then write down and crystallize the experiences, these painful, even when they were funny? I mean, funny now, but probably not funny at the time experiences. Yeah, it sucked. There were times that, I was like, there were several things in the book that I was like, I am not putting that in the book. And then it was like damn it, I have to put that in the book. Like that has to go in the book because the story doesn't make sense without it. So yeah, it was hard going back into some of those painful memories. At the same time, there's a reclaiming of the past that comes along when you do that. And so the process of writing the book was very healing and integrating as well.
So would you say your biggest reason for writing the book was for your own healing? Was it to testify to where you'd gotten? Did other Mormons or post-Mormons ask you to tell your story? Like what kind of, you mentioned that you'd been working on it for a while, but what finally made you decide this had to be written down and shared?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of all of those. Being in seminary in particular, like people would ask me all the time about my story and like, hey, is it true that Mormons da 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 da? So I did a lot of like educating about, yeah, the underwear, but like it's not as weird as you think, like you know what I mean, like that kind of stuff. And so there was that element of it. But mostly it was for, I think mostly it was for me, as far as integrating and then hoping that others, like by God's grace, hoping that others might see themselves in my story and also have an experience of grace, because I think that we're supposed to share our stories.
Wonderful. All right. Well, speaking of sharing the story, let's go to another drawing.
Yes, here we go. Who shall win? Dun 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 dun. I bet you didn't know it was a concert too. Krista Pickett, my cousin! Yay! And no spoilers, but you're in it a little bit there, Krista. So that's cool. Yay.
All right. And let's go on from there to the next reading.
All right. So this is a shorter reading about a time in between high school and college when I was experiencing a lot of anxiety and sought for some peace. So here we go. I knew I was being irrational. My thoughts distressed me precisely because they repulsed me. But I was convinced that if I reached out for help, I'd be locked up in a mental institution, never again to see the light of day. There was no scenario I could imagine in which someone might hear of the atrocities that consumed me and come to any conclusion other than that I was irredeemable. It was the conclusion I had drawn myself. My thoughts catastrophized. What if there was no good in me? What if I was so intractably evil that I was capable of committing abhorrent wrongs against my will? And the worst thought of all, the one that made me wish I could climb out of my body and float away into formless oblivion. What if I've already done horrible things, but suppressed the memory of it? The fear spread like ink, spilling over blank sheets of paper. I was so full of shame, I couldn't speak of it. My survival depended on the long walks I took after work, east along Main Street, past the bookshops, cafes, and pioneer-era meeting house made of quartzite and limestone, then north toward the temple. Its foreboding turrets pointed heavenward while its rock-face exterior faded into shadows, a dark silhouette in the waning light. I'd slip through the iron fence surrounding its perfectly manicured gardens and sit by a reflection pool in the courtyard. Somehow, I felt that the temple held the key to all my worries. If only I could crack it open, bring its mysteries into the daylight. My anxieties were connected to this place, though I couldn't articulate why, and I believed they could be cured by it. I'd been taught from birth that the temple was the closest I could get to God in this lifetime. I never went inside, convinced I would defile the place. Instead, I walked around the temple grounds day after day. One evening, as I struggled to contain my tormented thoughts, I noticed small crevices at the front and back of the structure, a gap between two walls that met at a 45-degree angle, producing just enough space for a person to slip inside and stand sandwiched between the rock slabs. I stood at the gap and clutched at the temple walls, sobbing. Later, I told a friend I had hugged the temple. It didn't occur to me then what cold comfort that was, how futile it is to attempt to squeeze hope from stone.
Well, that was very different from the previous. There is no humorous relief there. It is just pain and cold stone. So let's transition a little bit more lightly with some definitional stuff here. So again, you're used to educating me on all the stuff that I don't know. So I'm going to again play the idiot outsider here. What's the difference between the temple and other temples and like worship sites in Mormonism versus how churches function in mainstream Christianity?
Yeah, so Mormons have both a temple and a church. And the temple is a specific place where the rituals, some of the rituals that I talk about in the book, the sealing ritual in particular, is performed inside a temple. And only Mormons, active Mormons who have been deemed worthy through an interview process can enter the temple. And there's like, I don't know, there's more and more of them than, every year. But I want to say there's like, I don't know, 160, 170, something like that globally, right? So there's not that's a lot, but there's not like a ton of them. Like, you go to Utah and there's like 160 temple, just regular churches, in a 4-block radius. That's an exaggeration, but not quite, especially in Provo. So anyway, so that's the temple. It's a special, set apart space for these particular rituals. And then the regular church building is like Sunday services. Anyone can come. You don't have to be Mormon to come. You can come visit, that sort of thing. That's where most of the sort of day-to-day fellowship of Mormonism happens. So that's kind of the difference. Does that help?
Okay. No, that helps a lot. That helps a lot.
Okay.
So you write about both your local temple and then the big one in Salt Lake City and going and seeing things there. And there's some sort of taboo about sharing that outside of the folds. Yeah, we get the impression you're not supposed to even really know if you're not a true Mormon, but so what does that mean for you as a post-Mormon to be writing about the temple? Was that tricky for you? Did it raise issues? Are you going to be pilloried for revealing things you weren't supposed to reveal? I mean, beyond everything else in the book. So just talk us through that.
Yeah, no, so I tried to be very respectful in the way that I portrayed the temple and talked about the temple. That's a good point, Wendy. Yeah, that Mormons do say the temple, even though there are many temples, but it's just called the temple. Yeah, that's it. That's a really good point. Anyway, so there is a little bit of a taboo about saying anything about it, but there are within. I think even the church is starting to break that down. Like they have videos where they show different rooms in the temple and they talk about what happens there, and they show the temple clothes and even the temple garment. There's which is the underwear. That's the church has done all that. So there are certain things that in the temple you specifically promise not to reveal, and I did not reveal any of those things out of respect. I know how that would be hurtful to some of my Mormon friends and family. So I tried to be very respectful while also speaking honestly and talking about how the experience of the temple kind of impacted me.
So for you coming into the Lutheran version of Christianity, was it surprising to you or curious that there isn't this kind of distinction between church as worship center and then like kind of central holy place? I mean, like, it's fun to go to Wittenberg or exciting to go to Jerusalem, but they don't have the same kind of quality as the temple in Salt Lake City does.
I don't think I don't think that was something that like tripped me up by the time I got to the Lutherans. I'd been church hopping for a long time and stuff. So I was sort of more familiar with how that was a unique, I'd been enough outside the culture to be like, oh, that's a Mormon thing. That's not like a thing. So no, that didn't surprise me. I will say the non-secretive nature of the sacred ceremonies, like communion, baptism, those sorts of things. There was something refreshing about the fact that it was all out in the open. And it was like, and this is it. This is, you know what I mean? Like there's not a secret side that you don't know about. This is what it is. And it's all here, public. And I appreciated that.
All right. Wow. That's really interesting. Okay. Well, let's go on to our next drawing.
All right. I want everyone to know that the tab is called the Wheel of Names on my browser. And I think that that's cool. I'm just trying to come up with stuff to say. Spins. Quentin Casperson. Congratulations. Woo. Yeah.
All right.
Quint. I'll reach out,
Cool.
Quint, if you're not on.
All right. Great. Way to go, Quentin.
Yes.
Okay. And let's move on now to the next reading.
All righty. So this piece talks about aspects of my mission. I served a full-time mission to Bulgaria, and it was a deeply formative experience. I would not take it back. I would go. I don't know that I would go again, but I wouldn't undo that I went. Let's put it that way. But it was hard. It was really hard. It's a really structured experience. And I felt a lot of internal kind of pressure. My scrupulosity was extremely bad while I was there. And so most nights and days, especially I would be crying out to God, hoping for some sense of God's forgiveness and God's peace. And I struggled to feel that. But it wasn't all bad. There were some holy experiences as well. And so that's what this reflection is about. None of this is to say that my mission was entirely without joy. I've come to understand that even in the most trying circumstances, there can be sparks of hope. As if life has a will all its own, pushing up through loss like dandelions. I had holy experiences despite myself. The time I witnessed a middle-aged woman's first prayer. When a sex worker wandered into Sunday services in Sofia drunk and weeping, and I found myself saying, God loves and forgives you, and knew instantly it was true. The Christmas Eve dinner we shared with a family we were teaching, they never converted. And they served us a traditional vegetarian meal on a tablecloth spread over the floor, set with homemade bread, bean soup, stuffed peppers, dips, salads, cabbage rolls, and compotes. I suffered nearly every minute of my mission. Yet even now, I wouldn't trade it. My mission brought to the forefront the pain I'd tried so hard to repress. There was no escape, no playwright's world of imagination to slip into, no boys or gossiping classmates to distract me. There was only the knocking of doors, the humiliation of constant rejection, and the depths and contours of my doubt. In broken Bulgarian, so that no one back home would be able to decipher my secrets if they happened upon them, I journaled breakthroughs. I admitted to myself that I'd always had more anxiety than was rational, that I struggled to stay rooted in reality. I'm not here. I'm never really here. I couldn't feel the sun as I walked through the streets, couldn't hear the wind rattling the trees. I had recurring nightmares that my mission was over and I'd returned home without having experienced any of it. Looking back, I see God at work in this, a kind of mercy that was both harrowing and necessary. It was a step toward the truth, if it can even be called a step, more like a stumbling, a falling into recognition. I was broken, and no amount of effort could change that. I could never will myself to worthiness. I sank into despondency, but at least I'd named the problem. I cannot force myself to be enough.
Just wow, that was really beautiful and powerful. So I have seen, and I'm imagining most of our audience has seen, a pair of tall, clean young men in blazers and name tags walking or riding around and eager for a conversation. And I have to say, before I knew you and knew better, I avoided engaging in conversation. I think if that happens again now, I will give them something nice to eat and have a nice conversation with them. So I am glad to have been recognized Samaritans when I see them now through your work. I have never seen a pair of young women doing this. And so I'm really curious, how common is it for girls to do a mission? Were you unusual in that respect? And do you have any idea like what percentage of young Mormon missionaries are female rather than male?
Those are great questions. So when I went, you were not, let's see, as a young woman, you went when you were 21, and the reason that I think that they had young women wait was because the first priority for young women was to get married. And so if you did not get married by the time you were 21, then you might consider a mission, but you didn't have to. And so not a ton did. I don't know the percentage. I want to say maybe, I don't know, if I think back to my mission, maybe 10, 15% of us were women, were female. That in a few years, I don't even know how long ago now, but a few years after I got back, they changed the policy. So now girls could go when they were 19. And so I get the impression that a lot more women go now than when I was there. And I don't know, my sister was out on her mission actually when they made that policy change, and she said there was like a big flood of sister missionaries. That's what they call them, sister missionaries, that came in. So when I went, it wasn't like unheard of, but it was on the rare side. And I think that has changed, but it's not a requirement for girls, and it is sort of like a requirement for boys.
Very interesting. So you were kind of inadvertently a pioneer in some ways.
Yeah. Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So there's an interesting question here in the comments saying that considering where you have got to now on grace, do you have any regrets about not what you experienced, but what you taught or communicated to people as a missionary in Bulgaria?
Yes. I do. Yeah, I guess fortunately or not, I don't know. I have heard that like pretty much no one that I taught is still like an active Mormon. And there's a part of me that's like, good, go back to the Eastern Orthodox Church. Like that's a good one. I don't mean to offend my Mormon friends who are on here. I certainly think that, as I talk about in the book, it's not like Mormons are bad and Christians are good. It's not that sort of thing. That's not the point of the book by any means. But, you know, I do think that in particular, by teaching people a system that, you know, that requires worthiness, I feel bad that I did that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure anyone who's in the religion business regrets things that they have said in the past, and I am no exception there. I see another question has popped up from a frustrated Catholic.
Oh, okay.
Says, I have many questions, but we'll ask this: do you believe there is an Almighty, and if so, how? All right, here's your chance to do mission the right way. Go, Katie.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that is a big question. I mean, yeah, I do believe that there is an Almighty, and the reason for that, has been just experiences of divine love, experiences of divine grace and mercy. I don't lean on any sort of, empirical or philosophical kind of proofs of the existence of God. That's not something that's ever animated me. And I think to a certain extent, I'm just a person who always has believed. I know, there's some people talk about having a God gene. Like they're just, some people are just, I think most people are just sort of predisposed to believing in God. I think I didn't believe in God maybe for like 15 minutes once, and it really sucked. So I'm just sort of hardwired to believe. And I understand that there are folks that are frustrated, and I understand that there are folks that don't believe. And I think especially for people who have had painful or traumatic experiences in religion, which is a lot of folks, there comes a time when you have to let go of the idea of God, the harmful, painful idea of God that you had. And for a time, maybe even a long time, maybe even forever, I don't know, that will feel like you don't believe in any kind of God at all. And I think that that's okay. And I think that there's wisdom in taking your time, that you need to breathe. You need to heal from whatever trauma you might have experienced in the name of God. I believe at a certain point, though, along the way, you'll begin to feel tugs of connectedness. You'll begin to feel tugs of awe and of wonder when you look around at the world, when you hold a new baby, right? And just let those moments be there. Don't feel like you have to explain them one way or another. Just sit with them and see what happens.
Oops. Well, I think that just made up for everything you said in Bulgaria. Way to go. All right. I have one more question related specifically to the mission thing, which is, how did this inform or cause or affect your commitment to an interest in mission now as a Christian? Like, that's really your area of focus, is rethinking what mission and outreach means for a post-Christendom context, and especially in the US. Mm-hmm. I mean, there has to be, whether it's negative or positive, like, what's the relationship between these two?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's like, so one thing that I have found that is so frustrating about, especially like mainline Protestant Christianity, like Lutheranism and some other Presbyterians, if there's any Presbyterians on here, I love you, but come on, is the fact that, no one talks about their faith, really. Like, I remember being in a class, in seminary, and the professor was like, yeah, Lutherans, they don't even pass their faith on to their kids. And I was like, what planet did I land on? Like, that That's so not the way that I grew up, right? So there's always been, I wouldn't say, at this point, it's not an imperative to like make people believe the right things or get people to have, to say, yes, this is right, and I believe this now. It's not really about that, as much as it is about wanting to share the experience of love and grace, and making it, showing, not just saying, but showing through actions and through relationships and all those sorts of things that there is more, and that that we can live into justice and mercy and love together, but we can't force ourselves there, right? Like I talked about, like you can't force yourself to it. You accept it as a gift from God. And I think that, in that sense, I would love to open up those kinds of conversations.
Good. Well, I just put you in charge right now.
Oh, great. Because that won't go, there's nothing that could go wrong in that case.
No, unlimited power. Okay, it seems like we have a heckler here who may be related to you.
Who is your favorite sister? And how many chapters are dedicated to her, me, in your book? Ray, you're hardly even in my book.
That must be the greatest compliment she can pay you then. No one wants to be related to a memoirist, right?
That is so true. No, I love all my sisters equally. And they are dear to me. And I love each of you. And
she means literal sisters, not sister wives, in case any of you Gentiles out there don't understand.
You don't have those. So that's for sure.
Okay, let's go to the next drawing.
All right, here we go. Spinny, spinny, spin, spin. And the winner is John Visser. Yay, John. Woo, congratulations. That's awesome.
All right, and let's go on to the next reading.
All right. So one of the aspects of this book is about, I love you too, sisters. I'm seeing you all in the chat. So something that's deeply Mormon about me, and is still Mormon about me, is the need and the desire to understand family history. That's something that Mormons do a lot. And as I was writing this book, and as I was trying to make sense of my own experience and my own journey, I felt compelled to go back into my family tree to understand where I came from a little bit better. And one of the things that I discovered as I was doing that, so throughout the book, there are little vignettes of me reaching back into my family's past, not necessarily just my past, but into the family's past. And one of the things I discovered was that I am descended from the Puritans. In fact, some of my ancestors came over on the Mayflower, and I always say that I believe that I would be eligible to join the DAR if I wanted to, but of course I don't want to because I have seen Gilmore Girls. But here is a reflection that I wrote about the Puritans and about scrupulosity and some other things. I am certain I'm not the first in my family to experience scrupulosity. I can't be. I come from a line of Puritans. It's a caricature, perhaps, but with cause. The Puritan conscience was notoriously sensitive. They denounced popular culture as sin and devised rules prohibiting innocent pleasures, playing chess, organ music, Christmas celebrations. In the face of such extremes, some fell into vexation of soul, a kind of chronic fear that brought those caught in it to the brink of despair. Even this they prohibited, ascribing despair itself to distemper of the body and Satan's malice. Thus, you sealed your condemnation. Both the symptoms and your response were manifestations of evil, evidence that you'd fallen beyond the reach of divine grace. John Bunyan, author of Pilgrim's Progress, compared his experience of unwanted blasphemous thoughts to being tortured upon a rock for days on end. I can attest that he doesn't exaggerate. My mother says she knows something of the torment as well. When I've described to her the depths of my distress, she has acknowledged that it resonates with her own. Perhaps her mother knew it too, and it's why she drank. I wonder if this is an aspect of the legacy handed down to me, devotion and anxiety rolled up together, part awe, part terror. It isn't entirely wrong. It is sensible to be terrified of God, the power that made earthquakes and tornadoes and the vast expanse of oceans that can swallow human beings whole. It is sensible to stand back from the rim of the Grand Canyon, lest overconfidence send you plunging. The ancient Hebrew proverbs say that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, and it's true. It is sensible to understand that we are specks of dust in a vast universe of mystery, barely registering an echo beyond our lifetimes, here, then gone, then largely forgotten. We like to fashion ourselves as central somehow, mini gods of our own making, but this is folly. The beginning of wisdom is acquiescing to the transcendence that can annihilate us in a single breath, the concession that God is God, and we most certainly are not. This is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end. There is sensibility in fear, but at a certain point it must give way to trust or there can be no hope. And this is where my Puritan ancestors got it wrong. They turned fear into an end in and of itself, as if it alone is the proper posture before God. Conscience, the Puritans said, is God's court within us, register, witness, accuser, judge, and executioner, a foretaste of hell in our minds and bodies, terrifying us into submission. But hell does not lead to God. It separates us. It is devoid of truth, an unending landscape of lies. Fear cannot save us. It can only bring us to the recognition that we need saving. After that, it outstays its welcome, morphing from wisdom to mischief. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God, but the end of wisdom is God's love, which drives fear away. A love that originates with God and culminates in God, the source of all creative power, both terrible and great. I spent years in hell, wandering its dark, twisting corridors, searching fruitlessly for an escape hatch. But release is not found within the walls that hold us captive. It comes from without, breaking us open with splintering light. This, of course, makes it the most terrifying force of all. We are committed to nothing so much as the lies we tell ourselves to survive. The realignment of our loyalties takes an act of God himself, and still we fight back as hell works its way out of us, shrieking and protest as it goes. Nothing hurts as truth does. It's no wonder we'd rather resist, even when resistance would cost us everything.
Once again, great and amazing stuff. Let's talk ancestors. So this is something that outsiders often know about being baptized for the dead, including your own ancestors, but sometimes other people's ancestors. And I have to say, from my own experience, like I vaguely know about 4 generations back, and beyond that, it's like, you know, they probably came from that part of the world over there, but nothing deeper. And now I'm living in a place where ancestors are hugely important, and that there is still a certain reservation, even among the Christian positive, to getting baptized because an older generation will fear that it will mean the abandonment of the rites of filial piety that guarantee a happy afterlife for ancestors. So, of course, you do not have any Japanese Shintoism in your story, but ancestors are a big part, and they are in many parts of the world. So just kind of talk us through where that fits into your memoir overall.
Yeah. So, like I sort of said at the beginning, it was important to me to understand my own ancestors because of the way that I was raised to respect and revere to respect and revere ancestors. But it was interesting because the ancestors that I was taught to respect and revere were the Mormon pioneers. And so someone like my husband, Lanny, who comes from multiple generations of Mormon pioneers, that's really meaningful for them, for him. But for me, where both my parents are converts to Mormonism, it was less meaningful. And in a way, I tried to adopt the Mormon pioneers as my ancestors. And part of the process of writing this book was to be like, wait a minute, those guys weren't my ancestors. Like they're maybe Lanny's ancestors, or there's some people's ancestors, but they weren't my ancestors. So who are my ancestors? And understanding and recognizing, like for generations back, they were Protestants. There was something about that was important to me. I don't know if it gave me I think one of the things I was afraid of doing because of how much I love my family was I was afraid of betraying them and separating myself from them and being separated from them with this sort of religious shift. And so it was important to me to go back and reclaim my own family history and be like, no, actually, there's continuity here. There's continuity between my ancestors and where I am. Not that you have to do that, but because of the way I was raised, that was important to me.
I really love this. So for readers and future readers out there, the main chapters are interspersed with named ancestors and Katie's reflection on them. And it's interesting in itself because you make the whole concept of ancestor complicated, like you're descended from one of the early English Lutheran reformers, but then which is super cool. But at the same time, you realize genetically, what is the relationship after so many things? So I just advise all of you out there, she does such an interesting job of dealing with this. But at the same time, I really love that it was something that you brought into your narration of yourself as a Christian. And a basic principle of cross-cultural world mission is that you don't just axe out the previous culture, but you find ways in which the gospel can transform and uplift that. And I think you just do a fabulous job of that with this passion for ancestors. It's so widely known as typical of Mormonism. We got another great question on the chat, which is, you talk so much about grace. What is grace? Tell us what it means to you. I don't think we're looking for a theological dictionary.
Definition. No, I mean, for me, I think grace is, this is a little theological. I think Tillich talks about being accepted and then accepting that you are accepted. That's what grace is. It's an ability to relax and release the need to be right and to accept what really is, because you know that your fundamental okayness, I know that that's not really a word, but that your fundamental okayness is never at stake. To know that you are loved no matter what. And you start from that place. And then that opens you up to be able to change, to grow, to repent, right? To apologize. These things that we avoid doing because we don't want to admit that we've done things. We don't want to admit that we're wrong because we ask the question, what does that mean about me? And the bottom of the answer to that question is always you're beloved. You're beloved, you're beloved, you're beloved, no matter what. Then that opens up room for there to be acceptance and growth and healing. And so for me, at the bottom of it, that's what it is. It's just the knowing deep in my core, in my bones, that no matter what, I am loved and God has claimed me.
Amen. And you get an A+ on your systematic theology final exam.
I know.
All right. Well, speaking of creating future ancestors for even later people, what about indoctrination of children in Lutheranism or mainstream Christianity? What does it mean actually to share the faith with children in a way that doesn't end up as a wellspring of spiritual pain, as your memoir documents?
Oh, that's a big question. Yeah, I mean, I think, we have to teach. I don't resent having been raised Mormon or having been raised in a very devout Mormon family. Like I am grateful for that experience. And so I for sure, I think it's right that we raise our children according to our values and teach them what we believe and instill in them the values that we have, that we would want them to have. I think it's important. Look, I am no expert. My 14-year-old is right here. She's probably rolling her eyes at this whole thing. She is. But I do think at a certain point, part of that process is learning to accept your children as they are, right? The graciousness that you've received, you share that and you extend that to everyone, including your family, even though they're the hardest ones to extend grace to sometimes. And you let them be themselves and you learn and grow and you have open conversations. And, if they're doubting or don't believe something, well, tell me about that. Like, yeah, I can see, like, that's an interesting point. Have you thought of this? That sort of thing. So I would never want to coerce my children into belief. I don't believe that that's even possible. I don't think you choose to believe. I think faith itself is a gift. And so you teach them and you bring them up in your values, and then hopefully they don't do terrible things.
All right. Well, this is a rich vein we could go on with, but I think it's time for our next drawing.
All righty. And I think this is the last one. Yeah?
Yes. This is the last one. So everyone cross your fingers.
The last drawing and the last reading. Here we go. The winner is Russell Rathbun. Yay, Russell. Congratulations. You are the winner.
All right. And now let us go on to the last glorious reading of Breakthrough in the Form of Caffeine.
That's right. Yes. So if you've heard me tell my story at all, this is one that I often tell, and it's one of my, if I do say so myself, one of my more charming anecdotes. But it is so. People may not be familiar, but Mormons are not supposed to drink coffee. It is not allowed according to the rules. So this is a story of the first time I drank coffee. Well, now I just gotta find it. Here we go. Yeah. So here we go. It was the coffee that did it. In all my life, I'd never had so much as a sip. By the way, this was 10 years ago. That's not in the book. I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm just telling you. I was like 30 when I had coffee. Okay, here we go. It was the coffee that did it. In all my life, I'd never had so much as a sip. But that summer, two thoughts converged to produce an act of defiance. One, a God of grace couldn't possibly care what beverages I drank with my breakfast. Two, my sense of conscience on the matter was enough. I called my sister Jenny. 7 years separated us, which had been an eternity growing up, but now that she was married and in her early 20s, we'd become close. Although I was older, she'd preceded me in doubt and had already crossed over into the forbidden world of cappuccinos and French presses. I asked her for advice. "Get a mocha," came the wise response. I drove to the Super Target in Winona and parked, the hot summer sun increasing the temperature inside the car by the moment. It must have been 90 degrees out. When I could stand it no longer, I took a deep breath and hurried toward the entrance. Just inside was Starbucks. The smell of ground coffee greeted me in a gust of wind as I walked through the sliding glass doors. I approached the counter with as calm a demeanor as I could muster, my hands clammy, certain the barista could see into my soul. I'll take a mocha," I said, trying to act as if I'd done this 1,000 times. "Hot or iced?" I wasn't prepared for this question. My composure cracked. Hot?" She saw the sweat dripping off me and raised her eyebrows. It was the wrong answer, but I couldn't take it back. I tried to smile confidently, like, "I knew it was weird, but I wanted what I wanted, thank you very much." I could tell she wasn't buying it, so I averted my eyes, guilty. 2 minutes later, I was cradling the drink in my hands, standing again in the heat of the asphalt, wondering what the hell I'd just done. I brought the cup to my lips. It was bitter and sweet, complex in a way I hadn't anticipated. I called Jenny. "Drinking a mocha," I said. "And? It's not that bad." That was it. Neither a lightning strike nor a whirlwind, but hot milk, some chocolate syrup, and a shot of espresso on a blistering day. I rarely drink mochas anymore. They're far too sweet. I prefer my coffee black. But each cup is a revelation. Those who haven't been denied simple pleasures in the name of religious purity don't understand how something as ordinary as fresh brewed coffee can contain the multitudes of God's generosity. Mormons get it. Every once in a while, when I tell this story, a Mormon will ask almost wistfully, "How did it taste?" And I'll smile and say, "Like freedom."
Wonderful. Love that one. I think that was the first excerpt I read of your memoir, and maybe for many people, it's the first. So you said God doesn't care what you drink with your breakfast. So I was wondering how God feels about a fifth of vodka with your scrambled eggs. Is that also cool?
God is fine with it if you need it, you know?
All right, good. So tell us then how the experience of grace led you to this discernment about breaking the rules.
Yeah, I mean, it was, so I would talk about profound experience of grace, years prior to that, in which I just thought about it and just kind of decided, I just don't think drinking coffee is a sin. It's like, I don't think it is. And I was, it's kind of like reading Paul too. It was like, yeah, no, I don't have to go by the rules of this law or whatever. Not that we don't pay attention to how we treat others. And certainly there are still such things that we might call that are called sin. And we do those, but I discerned that I didn't believe coffee was one of them. And so therefore I was free in Christ to drink coffee. That was really the theological reasoning I had with myself. and so then I thought, well, if I'm free in Christ to drink coffee, then why am I not drinking coffee? And it was like, well, you're not drinking coffee because you don't want to break the rules. You don't want to disappoint people. You don't want people to judge you. And I was like, those are all stupid reasons not to drink coffee. And I want to, and I don't think it's a sin. And so I'm free in Christ to drink coffee. So I'm going to drink coffee. And so I did. That was my thought process.
That reminds me of Paul confronting Peter over, his pretend, sometimes keeping the rules, sometimes not, so as not to offend, but like having the priority misplaced, right?
Right, exactly.
You lived out Galatians at Starbucks. I love that.
So that Paul
I'm also wondering, is there some kind of deep spiritual metaphor of starting at sugary, milky coffee drinks, and then as you theologically mature, going for the hardcore black coffee?
Probably. I hadn't thought of that. No, I think it, I suppose the metaphor could be this, that, you start on a path, and then as you get more deeply into it, get further along and get more deeply into it, you begin to appreciate the different textures and the notes of blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to sound like I know that much about coffee. I don't.
Bouquet.
Yeah, the bouquet, the what is it when the flower, is that when it does it flower when you use a French press? I don't know. Someone's judging me right now in the chat. It's fine. Yeah, no, so but I do think there was like gradually began to actually just really like the taste of coffee itself. And then it was like, well, why do I put all this sugar in there? Like, and I found myself taking less and less sugar until finally I was like, this is better black. So anyway.
Wow. I think there is some deep correspondence there to growth in the spiritual life.
Sure.
It's good to start very sweet, but
or it could be, Sarah, like the gradual descent into hell, when you don't, you just bit by bit take out the good until all you're left is the black, deep, dark cup.
That's great. All right. Well, we are a little over time here, but I'm so grateful to all of you who have stayed on and given great comments there, especially the many sisters of Katie who have lots to say on these coffee matters. But Katie, let's give you a chance to give a closing word overall about your book and what you hope people take away from it.
Yeah, I mean, I just hope that that the book can be something that can help people kind of understand a little bit better the spectacular and amazing grace of God. And I'm so grateful to all of you who came today. It means so much to me. And just, I've been trying to avoid looking at the chat, but it's impossible to totally do that. And I just, the support and all of that stuff is so meaningful to me. And thank you so much. My deepest and dearest hope for the book is just that someone might read it and come to see how wonderful and beautiful and amazing God's grace is, and perhaps find their own story in my story somehow. So thank you. You can, if you haven't already, you can order it on any of the major platforms. You are welcome to go to my website, katielangston.com or thornbushpress.com to find order links there. And, since I think this is pretty, a pretty friendly crowd that comes out to something like this, tell your friends. I think, we don't have a huge advertising budget. We're not, with Sarah, we're we're a small, she's a small publishing house, and so, but I think we believe in this project and that it will spread by word of mouth, and you are sort of the the ones that could help sort of plant that seed. So if there's someone who you think could use this book, who would benefit from this book, who would enjoy this book, please share it with them. That would mean a lot to me. I'm interested to know, Jenny, what passage made you sob out loud today. So we'll talk later. But yeah.
Okay, and I just want to add in and get in the final word here that I have read this book 3 times. I loved it every time. I got more out of it every time. And I came to my friendship with Katie in this book knowing so little. So I would say any of you out there who have no connection to Mormonism of any kind, you will still love this book. And it is ultimately, for all of the weird and hilarious and intimate details, it really is a book about God. So whether you are someone who's in a good state with God right now, or you are in a lot of spiritual pain right now, this is an amazing book, and it will do something for you that other things just can't. So please, I echo Katie, check it out and share it around. All right, well, bye everyone, and thanks again for coming tonight.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.